And welcome back, everyone, to yet another episode of Going for Two, presented by Home Field Apparel. I am your host, the publisher of the Extra Points newsletter, Matt Brown. I am joined here by my colleague and co-host, Brian Fisher, as we get ready for a week of basketball. It's gonna be pretty fun. We've got some really fun men's and women's games coming up here over the next couple of days. We have our beautiful noon ball. We have the basketball that's going to distract all of our normies who don't work in sports. So that's all they're going to be talking about. It's going to go till midnight. I'm pretty excited. Should be pretty fun.
It is. I mean, where else do you get you're talking with like grandma or you're talking with your aunts and uncles, like, and it's about one thing. It's about your brackets. Like who's your upside, who's your 8-9, who's your 5-12. I love this time of year, and some pretty compelling matchups, like you said, across both tournaments. I mean, really, maybe one of the more intriguing kind of combinations of March that we've got, because there's interest on the men's side and the women's side, and it should be fun as we kind of make that road towards Minneapolis and New Orleans.
Are you good at bracket challenges typically?
I'm hit or miss. One year I'll do great. The other year I won't. But unfortunately, my son was born in September, so like the amount of college basketball that I've consumed is. Everybody says this all the time. I haven't watched fewer college basketball than I ever had. Very much true for me because I've got a new kid. But I think it's gonna be a fun year. I typically do okay, but I have never won one.
I don't think I've ever won one. We do one with our family. And I'm in the bottom half every year. It's a tradition, whether there are some years, this was especially true early in my sports writing career, where I was religious about watching college basketball. And I would do all the homework and I would finish 7th. And then there were years, I think particularly when Extra Points started, when I would watch very little college basketball and I would finish 7th. This year, I watched New Mexico State play in person. They're really good. I've watched a couple Ohio State games. They're not very good. And a couple of games on the treadmill at the YMCA. That's about it. And I'm going to fill everything out. I'm going to finish 7th in the Brown family, Figueiredo family bracket. And I would imagine you're going to destroy me at the office pool. And that's just the way things go. But I'm still going to do one. And I'm going to, my only plea for everyone would be enjoy the games for what they are. If you are the person that is rooting against something that would be objectively funny because it would help your bracket, you suck. Unless you have like $50,000 riding on this thing, it is better for the world for a number 2 seed to lose in the first round than for you to make an extra $75 in your bracket. And I'm tired of pretending otherwise. This is not a show that's going to give you bracket advice for the men's basketball tournament.
Well, it sounds like you're saying don't pick Ohio State in that first round.
I am. Sister Jean and the Loyola Ramblers and their basketball coach, who I think is 16 years old and can't rent a car in most states, they're going to beat. I mean, I think they're literally favored against Ohio State. Everyone at OSU's hurt. Yeah, I would pick Loyola. Everything else, hell if I know. Go with your heart. This is not that show. This is what almost every other show is this week. I would recommend literally the rest of the internet. Sites that do not write about sports at all will probably have bracket advice for you, which is wonderful. Today, I want to talk about the women's basketball tournament because I'm going to be totally honest with you, Brian. As I have watched about as much women's basketball this year as I have watched men's basketball, which is to say a little bit, but not a ton. I would certainly not consider myself an expert in the women's college game. And we did want to talk about this. We had many of our listeners and our readers ask for this. And so we want to bring on somebody who does live in this world, who writes a lot about women's basketball, not just from the national high level, but from the real deep X's and O's level, who can break down plays and really diagram what's happening on the court. And we're lucky because there's more of those people now than there were a couple of years ago, which is a beautiful thing. I wanted to bring in my old colleague from my SB Nation days, Sabrina Merchant, who runs Swish Appeal. She writes across the SB Nation network full time. A really, I think, thoughtful women's basketball voice to help us explain this tournament. If you're like me, a normie that hasn't been watching a lot of women's basketball this year, that's okay. Maybe you will next year, but Sabrina can help answer some of your questions, so perhaps you can get the most out of this tournament, right? Let's why don't we bring her aboard here for a second? Sabrina, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with us.
I'm so happy to be here.
We have been really trying to dig into women's college basketball here for a minute. The schedules haven't worked out with a couple of other people. You had the audacity to go to Mexico. We wanted to talk earlier, but now I think is the perfect time because now we have the bracket's been announced. The tournament's about to start. We have a slew of casuals who are wanting to now love and appreciate the sport. Let me start by asking you a very stupid question. Is South Carolina the best team in the country this year, or are other schools maybe being slept on a little bit? I mean, this is the brand name program.
I think both of those can be true. So
Okay.
South Carolina is the wire to wire number one in the poll this year. They've only lost 2 games all season, both of them by 1 possession on fantastically ridiculous game-winning shots. So it's been just a really annoying year for a South Carolina fan, I have to imagine, because you end last season by losing to Stanford in the Final Four by 1 point when Aaliyah Boston, who's probably going to win Player of the Year this year, has a putback attempt that just doesn't quite go in at the buzzer. Yeah. Then you get into this season where you're clearly the best team in the country, but, not undefeated because of this ridiculous loss to Missouri and then to Kentucky in the SEC tournament. So it's a team that really has nothing to prove on the one hand, but also I want to say they've probably been the best team in the country for the last 5 years since they won a national title in 2017 and not a banner to show for it. So I think they're the favorites, but I also don't think that it would be altogether surprising if one of 3 other teams was the last one standing in Minneapolis.
It is kind of, that's the funny thing about college basketball generally, right? And this was, I think, a complaint about the women's game. I remember growing up and starting as a sports reporter, and this has been at the point talked about here on social media for the last couple of days because a prominent shithead went out there and said that this tournament doesn't have upsets, it's all chalk, it's not the same product. But clearly extremely good regular season teams can lose if they don't play perfectly. I guess on that note, looking through here, are there anybody under like a 6th seed or below, or a mid-major, or a team that maybe a typical fan might not have heard of that you would look at and think, wow, based on this bracket, they could win 2 games. Like they have a chance to be really successful.
Yeah, it's funny. The mid-major that I think everyone's looking at, who was probably underseeded coming into this, is Princeton. But then they sort of got screwed by getting to face Kentucky, who basically underachieved throughout the entirety of the regular season, and then went on this 10-game winning streak to close the year out, capped by that dramatic victory over South Carolina in the SEC tournament championship. So that's got to suck for Kentucky and Princeton just overall for both of them to be placed in that situation. I don't love a lot of the double-digit seeds. I mean, Villanova is an interesting one. They were the last team to beat Connecticut. They're in not a hugely difficult part of their bracket, so it wouldn't be that surprising to see Villanova maybe get to the second weekend.
Yeah.
Just a couple of the other double-digit teams, like Stephen F. Austin was a good one, but North Carolina's a really good 5 seed, so I don't see that happening as a 5-12 upset there. I'm more focused on the 8-9 line to see if any of them could really put some fear into the number 1 seeds in that second game. But as far as double-digit seeds making a run beyond the Sweet 16, I'm not here to suggest that that's going to happen, but I also think it's more fun when the really good teams get to play at the end. So
sure, and that's true for the men too. Is there anybody in that 8-9 group that you think could maybe knock off an NC State or a Louisville? Is that is that a Nebraska?
Kansas State is a team that I'm looking at because they have Aoka Lee, who put up the Division I scoring record, 61 points in a game earlier this season. It's interesting because NC State has one of the best centers in the country too, and Elisa Konane, and that matchup with her and Aoka would be just delightful if it came to be. But who knows if Kansas State even gets out of the first round, against Washington State, who is surprisingly good in the Pac-10 this year. Sorry, Pac-12 this year. Louisville, probably the weakest number 1 seed. Kind of surprising that they got it over Baylor, but that last number 1 was just sort of there for the taking on the final day of conference tournament play, and nobody won their conference tournament who could have got there, namely Baylor. So I wouldn't be surprised if Louisville was the first to go out, but Louisville's region is also not the group of death that you would expect for the last number 1 seed. So I kind of think they got a decent draw based on the fact that I'm not sure they should have even been a 1 seed, but here they are with, I don't know, kind of a nice path heading to Minneapolis.
Yeah, I mean, I I don't know if Michigan is necessarily going to be a trendy Final Four pick or anything, and Tennessee and Oregon and BYU are all good, but not immortal. So I mean, yeah, I could see that.
Speaking of those double
yeah.
digit seeds, actually, Tennessee and Buffalo is a game that I'd keep an eye on because Buffalo's got D'Asia Fair, who's just one of the very best mid-major players in the country. Again, just another sucky draw to be up against Tennessee, who has some injury issues. So if they came out like not great early, would not be altogether surprising as they work back, some of their front court players.
Sure. How did she end up at Buffalo? Was this just a recruiting miss for some power programs that she just blossom later in her college career? I don't know if you see that as often.
Buffalo has one of the best coaches in the country, Felicia Leggett-Jack, who just, I imagine, is just a really good recruiter, and sometimes those are just people you want to play for, right?
Sure.
They're from the area, and that's somebody who you believe in. Like, I can see that happening.
It's interesting you mentioned Baylor earlier. I think you go back to coaches. I mean, maybe the biggest storyline in women's basketball is Kim Mulkey going from Baylor to LSU at the beginning of the season. I think she's kind of surprised folks at how quickly she's gotten LSU up to speed. Are you surprised that she's been able to do that there with the Tigers? And then I think consequently, Baylor has not really dropped off all that much from where she left it. Are you surprised at how the Bears have kind of kept things rolling?
Yeah, I guess that LSU is this good is a little bit more surprising to me just because they had a bit of a drop off, like beyond the Simone Augustus, Sylvia Fowles years. Like, it hasn't exactly been a great time to be LSU women's basketball, and Kim Mulkey's pretty much just gotten them back to where like they're 3 seed this year, which is far more than I think most people would have expected. But I mean, she's a really good coach. Like, for all anyone has to say about Kim Mulkey, and there are lots of things to say about Kim Mulkey. She knows how to coach a basketball team, and with the resources that she has in the SEC, like I wouldn't bet against her to get LSU back to a national title game like soon, not this year, but like relatively soon. It's been fun to watch Baylor without Kim Mulkey because they kind of play like an actual modern offense now. In the past couple years with Mulkey, like they're just so focused on their bigs, and they've had great bigs like Kalani Brown and Lauren Cox and just great players to run your offense through. They actually take threes now, which is just wild to think about a Baylor team that actually takes threes. Like, they won a national title game 3 years ago with like less than 10% of their offense coming from the 3-point line, which is insane to think about in the year 2019 that a team could actually win that way.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they actually have like a diverse way of scoring, and Alyssa Smith, who is potentially going to be the number 1 pick in this year's WNBA draft, number 1 or 2, depending on how you feel about Ryan Howard from Kentucky. She's a big who was like basically functioning just as a post hub under Kim Mulkey, and now gets to step out and like actually take jumpers and function out of the high post. And it's pretty cool to see that all of this talent that was functioning one way under Kim Mulkey is equally good, if not like potentially more scary, under Nikki Cullen.
On that note, are there any really, maybe this is a dumb question, but are there any really high level teams in this tournament that are still playing that way? I mean, if you look at the evolution of the NBA and the WNBA, where it seems like everyone's shooting threes and everyone's running motion, and you see more positionless play across the board. Is there anybody that's trying to roll out a 1980s Georgetown kind of lineup and slow things down and play more Paleolithic basketball?
I think Baylor was something of an anachronism over the last few years, and the fact that they got a coach from the WNBA to come in and lead them this year sort of helped them move into the 21st century, so to speak. I don't think you're going to see a lot of, I guess I should say, like, the rate of 3-point shooting is still not the same in the women's game as it is in the men's game. Like, you're still going to see mid-range jump shots and things like that in a way that just doesn't exist, like especially in the NBA. Yeah. But I don't think we're getting a lot of 2 big lineups and just completely eschewing jumpers. There's a lot of really great centers on the women's side. Like, NC State has a great center. We mentioned her earlier, Kunane, but they use her to like create open jumpers for their perimeter players, and that's not an accident. They're like the best 3-point shooting team in the country too. So sure, both of those things can all work together.
You have a great big. You can do more than just rebound. You can set screens. You can play away from the basket. There's all kinds of fun things you could do. I want to talk very, very quickly about LSU and the SEC, because in our world, stepping away from women's basketball, there is it's commonly thought of that, hey, this league now suddenly has not suddenly, but even more so now, has like $1 jillion from football that they can use to potentially invest and do lots of other things. We've seen the depth in SEC swimming explode over the past couple of seasons. We've seen the depth and softball, which is already very strong, I think get much stronger in recent years. Is there truth? I mean, was the SEC always any top 1 or 2 conference beforehand, or because now teams like LSU are empowered to make such big hires, has the depth improved recently?
That's a good question. I hadn't really considered it from that way, that the football money's pouring in, but like SEC gymnastics, if I think about it, is also pretty damn good this year too.
Oh
Uh,
yeah,
so that might be like an
and
NIL situation too.
yeah, and they can fill an arena. They'll bring 6,000-7,000 people in to go watch Auburn, Alabama, LSU gymnastics.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it kind of starts with Dawn, right? Like Dawn making South Carolina a powerhouse sort of just lifts like all boats in the SEC, because once you have a coach of her caliber who's creating a program almost out of nothing, like that just makes everyone want to compete in that arms race. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to see it that way. I still don't think the SEC is like the best conference in the country, but there's a lot to like there. You've got LSU, you've got South Carolina, who I think is the prohibitive favorite. You've got Kentucky, who can be as good as anyone on any given day.
Yeah,
that's a really interesting question to think about the football money coming in. I would hope that is the case, because there is so much of it that can just keep lifting up the rest of the women's programs.
Yeah, clearly a diminishing returns point. There's only so many locker room lasers anybody could hope to buy. You would think, hey, maybe we could use this to start kicking everyone's ass in women's basketball and soccer and these other places here too. Would you say the ACC is the best league this year, or is that the Pac-12, or am I forgetting another obvious one?
I know the Big Ten is fairly deep, but they don't play defense, so it's tricky. I don't know how they're going to fare against other teams who can bring it defensively in a way that the Big Ten teams don't. ACC was good. Yeah, I'd say probably the ACC this year, but it's really close. Like the Pac-12, I don't know, was as deep as it was a year ago, just because Arizona didn't quite have the season that they had with Aaron McDonald and the national title run they made a year ago.
Yeah.
But there's just, I don't know, there's a lot of good teams around the country. Like, I don't know that any one conference really jumps out to me as like, this is the one that you need to watch on a regular basis. But
yeah,
I guess just based on the fact that like the ACC had the 2 number 1 seeds in NC State and Louisville, like that might be the winner by default this year.
No, it's fun to think of the Big Ten as the fun, all gas, no breaks, no defense kind of league, which plays against type, I think, in literally every other sport. I know,
entirely.
But I know I watched some Iowa basketball this season, and that they seem to play like I play NBA 2K, which is to say, like, no defense at all. We're gonna pull up from the logo, and I don't know how good it is. I don't trust my own judgment there, but it's fun, and that's not something I say about
super
Iowa
fun. Yeah,
a lot. Am I correct in thinking? Maybe I'm an idiot. Caitlin Clark is an amazing basketball player, but she's not entirely the only engine behind what makes Iowa go, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They run just a really good offense, and obviously, like the fact that you have a generational talent like Caitlin Clark who can just bend the defense with her own like shooting gravity makes it a lot easier on everybody else. But like Monica Zanano is outstanding, just like as a pick and roll partner with Caitlin Clark, just really, really good at finishing inside. I mean, she's the reason I think they won the Big Ten tournament, because like Indiana, which was their main competition throughout much of the Big Ten season, has no answers for Monica just any time they played at all this season. Just a really, really excellent center. Not defensively so much, but like Iowa's offense all the time. We're going to try to outscore you as much as possible. And if it's 104-96, like that's perfectly fine with us. It's not a model that like South Carolina is going to use, obviously.
Right.
But no, they've got great stuff. Kate Martin, another starter on Iowa who's pretty decent shooter, gets things going. But I think Zanano is really just the unsung hero of this Iowa offense, because she just does so much dirty work inside that like allows Caitlin just a modicum of space, and you've seen Caitlin Clark when she gets an inch, like that's all she needs to get her shot off.
Yeah.
But I don't want to undersell Caitlin Clark either, because she is tremendous. Like to lead the country in scoring and assists, I don't believe any Division I player has ever done that, at least not on the women's side. And obviously they're scoring a lot of points on Iowa, so that makes it a little bit easier. Like pace adjusted, I'm sure those things aren't happening, but it's just those numbers. I mean, you can't say enough about it.
You don't have to be the most efficient player in the world if you can stretch a defense, that well, and are playing at a pace where you have that many opportunities. Like you still have to respect it either way.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Brian, I think you were going to say something.
No, it's just, Matt and I talk all the time about NIL and NIL opportunities. Is this maybe Caitlin's moment kind of where she can get broader than kind of the women's basketball community? Because she's so fun to watch, but this is more of a national stage, more interest nationally in terms of this tournament, probably more than ever, just kind of given the increase in branding with March Madness surrounding this tournament. Is this maybe even a bigger step stage for her to kind of take their star to a next level?
I would hope so because she's already got a lot of money coming in with the deals that she's done. I know she has one with this Midwest grocery chain, which the name escapes me, like something that starts with an H. I'm sorry, I'm not from the Midwest.
Is it Hy-Vee?
There we go. Yeah. And Kevin Durant has been talking about her all year. Like he says she's her favorite player. She's his favorite player in college basketball. The relentless Stephen Curry comparisons, I think, have also done her a lot of favors. But yeah, I mean, playing in Iowa, I'm sure there's just a limit on like the type of national attention you're going to get, even if ESPN has been trying to plug her as much as possible in terms of their like big Monday matchups. But I would hope that this is an opportunity for everyone to watch her because, like, number one, she's just so much fun, right? Like, I love watching Aaliyah Boston and South Carolina. I think they're a great team, but it's different watching like a back to the basket center who excels defensively versus someone who's going to pull up from the logo. There's just something that animates fans a little bit more. And again, no disrespect to Boston and South Carolina. It's just there's a way people like to watch basketball now. And I think Iowa captures that modern sensibility a little bit more. So there's a real opportunity here for Caitlin Clark to do something special. And the way the bracket shakes out, like we could get an Elite Eight matchup between Iowa and South Carolina, just like the most dichotomous matchup possible of two different styles and the two leading candidates for Player of the Year. And if she has a good showing in that game, even if Iowa doesn't necessarily win, like that's just an incredible opportunity for her to elevate her profile even more. And I'm so excited to just look into the NIL numbers after this tournament is over and see how like her and Haley Van Lith from Louisville and just like Paige Beckers from Connecticut, like what they can do to market off of this particular opportunity. Cause it's the first time, right? I can't wait to see what it looks like.
And it's the first time, right, that we're kind of getting this additional exposure. First, going back to prime time for the title game on ESPN, and even ESPN's even been airing a lot of these games on ABC. Mm-hmm. How much has the profile of this tournament kind of been elevated the last 2 years?
I like to think about the women's tournament like in its current phase dating from like 2017 onwards, because that's when Breanna Stewart left college, who probably just the greatest college player of all time, and probably the reason why so many of those parity conversations stuck in women's basketball, because when you win 4 titles in a row and win 4 most outstanding players in a row, like I can understand why people get a little bored watching that. But since then, I mean, of the last 12 Final Four games that have been contested in the women's tournament, 7 of them have been within 1 possession or have gone to overtime. Like that's just, you don't get that kind of drama on the men's side. It just doesn't happen for whatever reason. And like the games have just all been really, really good. The fact that ESPN is promoting them is just a response to the fact that like, oh, hey, if Arike Ogunbowale is going to hit game winners twice in the same Final Four, maybe these are the kinds of games we should be marketing. And then like the very next year after they do that, Arike has a chance to hit 2 game-tying free throws against Baylor in the national title game, ends up missing the second one. But like that drama is the kind of thing that really elevates the profile of this tournament. So sorry, Brian, I totally lost track of your question in the midst of my spiel about why the women's tournament is so wonderful. But I'm very glad that there are more opportunities to watch them on, actual like network channels like ABC, because the Final Four really like, always delivers for the women, especially in this modern era.
No, yeah, I can't think of a dud. We've had a couple of dud Final Fours on the men's side. Brian touched on something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I'm not sure maybe the best way to ask it, but when I think about women's basketball from an NIL lens, we look at like who are the most famous women's basketball players right now. Regardless of who's the best women's basketball player, Caitlin Clark is definitely up there. Paige Buckets is up there. The twins at Fresno State are up there. And while those are all elite, excellent basketball players, and you're right, Caitlin Clark's game translates in a way that's very accessible. They're also all white. And if we look at, I've done this. I've gone into Open Doors' database here, and I've looked at who has the most Instagram followers and everything. It's not a linear. Only white people are marketable, but it definitely would appear that there is a look that more easily translates to Madison Avenue. That's maybe different from how good you are on the court. And am I reading into something that isn't there? And two, if I'm not, do you think that there's anything that this tournament that could happen in this tournament that might change that or help make very good college basketball players who do not look like Caitlin Clark reach other financial goals?
I think you're absolutely right about where the NIL money has gone. I mean, even another name on your list like Sedona Prince, another white player for Oregon who has profited very well off of NIL.
Yeah.
And like you think about South Carolina and none of their athletes show up on these lists, even though, again, wire to wire, number one team in the country, best player in the country. Why isn't Aaliyah Boston the most marketable player in the world? Like, there's very clear reason for that. And I do think that, the WNBA had a survey a couple years back about how white players only make up about 20% of the league, but like 80% of the coverage in terms of how ESPN chooses to spotlight them. And that's definitely something that ESPN needs to take account for. Like, are we spending all of our energy on like Caitlin versus Paige, which admittedly was a tournament matchup last year, but there's a duty that they have in terms of like where their marketing efforts go to. And I think seeing like the tangible results of like, oh, hey, it wasn't just that we're giving more media attention to the white players, like they're actually making more money off of the opportunities that they have now. I do think that there is like an actual responsibility to say, oh, we need to spend more time talking about like the excellent Black basketball players that are in this tournament too. And there's so many, like Haley Jones for Stanford was the most outstanding player last year. And we've got Boston, we've got, Baylor and Alyssa Smith and Ryan Howard, and just a tremendous selection of players that you can talk about. But for a variety of reasons, like the two names that I think people know most heading into this tournament, if you're not like an avid women's college fan, are Paige Beckers, who like hasn't started a game since December, and Caitlin Clark.
Speaking of Beckers having not started, right? I think if I was to just grab a random person on the street and ask them about women's basketball season or show them the bracket, I think a lot of them are going to say like, well, where's UConn, or how good is UConn? And as I understand it, this is a team that, is full of McDonald's All-American type talent, has had a lot of injuries, hasn't had their, been fully weaponized, and has looked more mortal than a casual basketball fan might expect from UConn. Are they healthy and playing their best basketball now, or should America prepare themselves for maybe an Elite Eight that doesn't involve Connecticut?
So Connecticut looks really good right now. All of the December, like January, February injury, COVID issues that were affecting the program basically seem to be, behind them. Paige is returned. She's not playing her full minutes load yet, but she's back on the team. And the fact that they just obliterated the Big East tournament even without a fully healthy Paige is pretty devastating if you're a UConn hater, which is a lot of people who watch college basketball. And then they also got this gift in terms of the scheduling from the committee, because one of the regionals is in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and they are the 2 seed in Bridgeport, Connecticut. So they will be playing essentially 4 home games to get to the Final Four, even as the 2 seed, because for those who are unaware, like the first 2 rounds of the women's tournament are all hosted by the top seed in the pod. So they get to play their first 2 games in stores, and then potentially the next 2 games in Bridgeport, even as like the lower seed to an NC State, should that game come to materialize. So the fact that they got this location benefit, which again is like not the committee's fault, it's just that Bridgeport happens to be where the games are scheduled.
Right.
And like they haven't lost since early February. Everybody's back. Paige was the national player of the year last year. Like, whether you agreed with that decision or not, just really damn good at basketball. And the fact that everybody else got to figure out what they need to do without her, and then you get to add her into this situation. This UConn team is damn good. Like, I don't know that they're South Carolina good, but they did lose to South Carolina earlier in the season, and it's tough to beat the same team twice in one year. So I would be worried about Connecticut if you were like interested in the downfall of Gino Rama. Like, I'm not like marking any games like without Connecticut happening for the foreseeable future. They haven't missed the Final Four since 2007. Like the Final Four, we're talking about 15 straight years of just being in the final weekend. Everybody's talking about Connecticut. This is what they do. And I think it would be unwise to expect them to miss out this year.
That's fair enough. I feel like for most other sports, my casual rooting interest would always go towards the underdog and immediately against whoever is perceived to be the New York Yankees of that particular sport. I like watching Alabama lose, not because I have anything like personal against the Crimson Tide, but they win all the time, and it's fun. Yeah. It's fun to see things changing up. But I have to admit, I kind of like watching UConn beat the snot out of everybody. And I don't know if that's just like when you're conditioned, when you first begin to follow a sport and you develop some kind of attachment to whoever is amazing then. Maybe I'm a class traitor when it comes to women's basketball. I don't know, but I enjoy it. My apologies to Mercer. I'm sure you're a wonderful program, but I think I would enjoy watching UConn win by a gajillion.
Yeah, I like watching the good teams get to play against one another. Like the older I get, I've sort of gotten to the point where like beyond day one of the tournament, I don't want any upsets. I want to see all of the 1s and 2s plays against each other and see like who actually is the best in the country. And I do think Connecticut is in that class. Like I have them in my Final Four right now. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep them there by the time I like submit my bracket on Friday, but yeah, they're good. They're really good. And Paige is awesome and just has been waiting for months to get to play again.
We've made it nearly 25 minutes now, and we have not brought up the reigning national champions and discussed Stanford, which kind of speaks to, I guess, maybe the state of affairs out in the Pac-12 and just how, off the radar the Pac-12 can be at times, just given their media deals. But how good a shot does the Cardinal have to have repeating?
Oh, yes, the Pac-12 network media deals. That's a thing. Stanford is, I would say, better than they were last year. They lost their point guard to graduation, Keanu Williams, and so they had a bit of a turnover issue earlier in the season. They just like throwing the ball all over the place, especially in that loss to South Carolina earlier in the year. They haven't lost since then. They just blitzed through the Pac-12 regular season conference tournament. They have Haley Jones, who was the best player on their team last year, and she's arguably not the best player this year because Cameron Brink has taken a step forward. Just a tremendous defensive presence, like the reason why opponents shoot, 36% on 2s against Stanford, because she is terrifying to come into the lane against. They're so deep. Like you've got Lexi and Lacey Hall, Anna Wilson, who's just this ridiculous defensive presence at the point of attack. Fran Bellaby's coming off the bench, like who can just casually like unleash dunks and layup lines. There's everything you could possibly want on a team exists in Stanford, and they've got like Coach Tara Vanderveer, the winningest coach in women's college history, and like if they hadn't lost to South Carolina earlier this season, like I think we'd be talking about them more as like the prohibitive favorite. But the fact that the only time we got to see 1 and 2 go against each other and like South Carolina came out on top probably is the reason why we're not talking about them as like co-favorites. But again, this is like a very West Coast bias thing. I have Stanford winning it all right now, and that's because I just like picking the more Western team most of the time. But like they were really good last year. Obviously they were 1 possession away from losing to Arizona, 1 possession away from losing to South Carolina, but that's just how the Final Four tends to go in women's college basketball. Yeah. And they've played a lot of close games recently. Like they had just a barn burner in Oregon earlier this last month where Haley Jones had to just get in her bag and like do what most outstanding players do. And it was like leading this double-digit comeback in the fourth quarter. I just haven't seen a situation where I look at a team and think that Stanford doesn't have a way to counter them because they have such good perimeter defense. They have such good interior defense. Their 3-point shooting is really good. And then they run this Princeton motion offense where like, it's just hard for teams to contain them because if you go zone, then they just freaking bully the crap out of you on the offensive glass. So they have everything you could possibly want. It's just, they don't have the very best player in the country, which is I think where the advantage comes for like a South Carolina. But I don't think it should be surprising at all if Stanford repeats. It's just nobody has repeated since Connecticut in 2016.
Shoot, Stanford lost this year? Haven't they won like 15 games in a row or something stupid?
In the calendar year, I don't believe they've lost.
Yeah, it's pretty wild that we can talk for 25 minutes about a team that literally has not lost a game in this calendar year. And there you go. So, all right. So, yeah. So you've mentioned, hey, you think Connecticut's going to be in that conversation. You've got Stanford winning it all. Listen, we're not your boss. We're not here to go. You don't have to, you could put whatever you want on Vox Media. That's fine. Who do you have in your Final Four? Who are the other two?
Currently, I have not made a decision about the other non-South Carolina region. Okay. I like to fill like the top of the bracket and then work my way out, which is, I understand, not the way most people fill out these things. But I have South Carolina, Stanford, and Connecticut in the Final Four. I just have not decided who's going to join them in Minneapolis.
Okay, you heard it here first. Ole Miss, I guess, gonna come in there. Wasn't expecting that, but this all right. Let me ask you one other question, if I may. And this is more of a kind of broader women's basketball question. I remember from talking to folks that covered the WNBA, covered women's basketball in this country a couple of years ago. One of the challenges that I would hear was that for many women's basketball players, they would never become more famous than they would when they were in college, particularly if you're at a major program. And then it was hard to translate a UConn fan's diehard support of their player to the pros. And it was harder to get people to kind of follow them through and stay invested for the next several years. Do you think that is changing as both, I guess, women's college basketball becomes bigger and the WNBA in general becomes bigger, or is that still a marketing challenge that everyone is trying to tackle here?
I still think that the popularity of college basketball like far eclipses anything we get from the WNBA, and part of that is just the time of year that they play. I don't think summer leagues are ever as popular in the U.S. just because of the way like our culture works, like with schooling and stuff. I just don't think it works that way. And the thing is, like, even as the WNBA becomes more popular, I think women's college is also getting more popular. So the gap just hasn't shrunk at all. And then with NIL, like college players have even more opportunities to market themselves now, which just like is great. I'm really glad about that. But I don't think that the WNBA has done enough to close that gap at all. Like, I mean, they try to like put the draft right after the tournament and like capitalize on all of the momentum from college, but
just seems smart.
Yeah, I mean, but then you're also in a situation where like you can never have a combine and like drafting decisions are just nuts because like there's a week separating the draft and the end of the tournament, and a player who's in the national title game has 48 hours to decide whether they want to be in the draft or not, and it's disastrous.
That's a better point. Okay, that's smart. Okay,
there's good reasons for it.
I was thinking of just the marketing angle there for a second. Like, oh wait, yeah, combines are a thing. People do like to do scouting. Great point, Sabrina. No.
And I'm curious too. I mean, this is obviously the first tournament we've had since the gender equity report that the NCAA has gone through. We're going to get the first four for the first time on the women's side with 68 teams. We've seen the March Madness branding all over now, especially with Minneapolis hosting the Final Four. Has there been, some of the corrections that were discussed last year coming out of that tournament? Were they implemented? Do you feel like there's progress being made on account of the NCAA and kind of closing that gap between the men and women's tournaments?
Yeah, that gender equity report that they released this year was just so interesting in terms of just the innumerable number of ways that the NCAA invests more in men's basketball than women's basketball. Just like the fact that all of the sponsorship deals for like every single tournament other than men's basketball are sold together. So you can't sponsor the women's basketball tournament unless you choose to sponsor like 60 other NCAA tournaments is nuts to me. And the fact that like CBS controls sponsorship of the women's tournament when they don't even broadcast the women's tournament. There's just zero like effort put into actually supporting the women's tournament and making it as profitable as it could be. So those things can't change obviously until the media rights deal like comes up. But the fact that there is a first four is a nice step. I've been told that like the swag bags are the same for both tournaments this year, which was obviously not the case last year. More signage being put into place at the women's tournament. So like you actually feel that, oh, hey, there's a Final Four happening in Minneapolis when I'm here this weekend. These, I guess, like cosmetic things, like calling it March Madness is happening this year, which wasn't the case for the previous however many iterations of the tournament. But I think so long as those like fundamental systemic issues exist of like, oh, all of like our media rights deal is being controlled by an entity that has zero interest in broadcasting the tournament, therefore zero interest in selling the sponsorship rights for this tournament. Like as long as that still exists, there's just like so many more hurdles to have to overcome on the women's side. But it's definitely top of mind, right? Like because of that report, because of the TikTok from last year, because of, the conversation that I feel like every single female NIL athlete in college basketball just has been talking about the gender gap all the time this year. The fact that it's top of mind, I think, is really important, and it's something that is not going to be ignored this year in the tournament.
It has driven me nuts over the last year to see so many people, go like, well, women's basketball players in the tournament don't have these other financial opportunities because the interest just isn't there. It's so far outstripped by the men's tournament without realizing that it's not even close to an apples to apples comparison. One was like literally had their arms tied behind their back. I've talked to other conference commissioners who are like, yeah, I'm hosting the women's soccer tournament, and we literally can't get a single sponsor because nobody wants to spend $400,000 on a soccer tournament in Cary for because they have to do something for another event they don't care about. Like,
and the ACC tournament in Cary is awesome. It's awesome. It's so good. All of the best teams in soccer in the ACC.
Yeah, they have such great soccer, such great interesting people, and then people in Cary want to be involved. But like, why would I spend all my annual marketing budget to do stuff in New Orleans or San Antonio when I am the cookout here? Like, it's
oh man, now I really want cookout, Matt.
I know. I really want cookout too. We know maybe we can get out of here on this. We can all find ways to get a tray, even though cookout doesn't deliver to the state where we actually are. Sabrina, how can folks find you and your work? Because I know you're on a couple of different places in the SB Nation extended universe right now, right?
Yeah, so for now, most of my work at SB Nation is concentrated to Swish Appeal, which is our women's basketball site. And you can find me on social at Sabrina JM.
That sounds great. Sabrina, thanks so much for taking some time with us, and enjoy the tournament. Should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
I want to talk a little bit more about that conversation, but before we do, I want to briefly talk about somebody who also does a great job supporting collegiate women's basketball. That is, of course, our friends at Home Field Apparel. Home Field Apparel just wrapped up this season of Big New Saturday, where they create T-shirts and hoodies and crew necks and stickers and pants that are officially licensed with vintage, cool, unique athletic apparel. The last week was UCLA. Brian, I'm not afraid to admit this here. I spent over $100 last week.
There was not a bad item in that collection for you. So usually there might be a shirt or two that you're like, well, you know what, that actually will not look. I don't wear the color yellow very well, or you're like, the orange is just not suiting me. But every single thing on that collection was fantastic. No surprise, you spent over $100.
I typically avoid yellow for that reason, because I'm a mostly white guy, but my skin is just a little bit dark enough where yellow might be it doesn't look as good, I don't think. And by that, that's what my wife tells me. I don't know. I still got the 80s UCLA Tron shirt. Maybe we'll give it to somebody else. My father-in-law went there. So I got him and my mother-in-law UCLA shirts. I bought a couple of other things because the shirts are great. It's got the adorable vintage bear. You got the rose. You got a color scheme. Even if you don't look great in yellow, I bet you look great in baby blue. And there's a bunch of that there. But they also had great collections for NC State, for Gonzaga, for Cincinnati, for Illinois, my new adopted home state, and then a gajillion other schools, most of whom are participating in the either the men's or the women's tournament. So if you want to steal valor and pretend you attended a school that's participating in the tournament, if you want to buy some stuff for the mid-major that beats your rival and now you want to adopt them into your home, like many other Sons of Columbus have done for Appalachian State, even though that was, 15 years ago. Like that, you still see those things in the 614. You can do that at Home Field Apparel. And when you do that at Home Field Apparel, use promo code Extra Points and save 15% off of your first order. So you don't have to pay full price. So if you end up spending $100 on UCLA stuff, like I just did, well, maybe you only spend $90 on UCLA. No, you'll spend less than $90. You'll spend $85. That's how math works. I am a liberal arts major and didn't do very well in school, which is why I now write for a living. Get all that at homefieldapparel.com and get the fun, unique, eclectic collegiate apparel in your life to celebrate the team that beats Duke, which is what we all want to celebrate here, right?
Most people, depending on how our brackets are.
Yeah, okay. If you want to be a cop and you want to just root for Duke to begin with, then that's fine. I'm really appreciative of Sabrina taking some time to chat with us and breaking down what this looks like from a business perspective, from an on-court perspective. I think there really is something to the idea of, in the early rounds, it is fun to see some Southland school win a game or two. But when you get to the Elite Eight, you typically do want to see the best teams actually play against each other, and that's likely what we're going to see here. Should be fun. You got some contrasting styles. You have some really talented front court players. You have some big brand names. You have some names maybe we haven't seen at this stage here in a minute. I think it should be pretty compelling television.
I think so. And the good news is like it's so much more accessible than it used to be. You used to have to kind of go hunting around, to find women's games. I mean, if you ask a true basketball purist, they probably like the game more just from the spacing perspective. You're starting to see different styles of offense. Like it is a much more different game compared to the kind of prodding college basketball side on the men's side. And, to me, I think it's going to make for an intriguing year because you do have so many interesting storylines. I mean, you look, we talked about Baylor there, but, Texas, made that run in the Big 12. You got teams like Stanford, obviously Arizona, not living up to what they were doing last year, but you got some strong West Coast presence with them and Oregon and all that. So it just is a unique tournament. And I think this year the spotlight more than ever is going to be on the women's side. And I can't wait because there are some pretty compelling matchups, especially once you get out of the kind of the first weekend.
This isn't to say that you shouldn't engage with the men's basketball tournament. My humble opinion is you're not going to do any real work this week anyway, unless you're one of our listeners that works in college sports, in which case you're not going to do the kind of work that you were going to do this week anyway that isn't related to men's or women's basketball. Just lean into it. If you're an SID, maybe wait a couple of days to get back to somebody, unless of course that somebody's us, and in which case please respond to us immediately. But everyone else, just rather than picking one or the other, just say yes to basketball these next couple of days. You're gonna have a better experience for it. Thanks for sticking around here with us. We had I think another really good last couple of days across the D1 Ticker extended universe on Extra Points. Earlier this week, we wrote about kind of talked about this for a second ago with Sabrina about what the first men's basketball tournament was like. Andy Witchery is going to be writing for us later this week about what media coverage looked like for some of those early tournaments, including the NAIA tournament that was happening at the same time as the first NCAA tournament, which includes a lot of teams that are now in Division I, like Western Kentucky was in that first tournament. You could make a reasonable argument that the team that won the NAIA tournament would have beaten Oregon, or should have been in the conversation for the best basketball team in the country, something that does not happen now. We had a big story about name, image, and likeness collectives and the gigantic differences between those collectives and what makes one legitimate, what makes one a scam, what questions should we have, why do they exist in the first place? All that stuff could be answered at Extra Points, which is a pretty good newsletter in my opinion, which you can find at extrapointsmb.com. Fisher, you've done some pretty interesting videos this week. I saw you talk to Stu Mandel about collectives earlier today. You've done a couple other ones too, right?
Yeah, we did talk with Stu Mandel, the Athletic, about his story surrounding the $8 million player, I guess, from the class of 2023, who's being paid by one of these NIL collectives. So you can find that on Collegiate Sports Connect. Actually talking to somebody from Virginia's collective later in the week, so you can watch for that video as well. But yeah, it's jam-packed with a lot of information. You would think things slow down just a little bit this time of year. And yeah, that's true to a certain extent, but there's so much news going on around NIL, around just college athletics in general. The news cycle never stops, and you always find all that information not only on Collegiate Sports Connect, but on D1 Ticker.
So my advice to you, make sure you subscribe to D1 Ticker because that's free. This isn't just me being a company man. Matt Roberts isn't listening this late in the podcast. It's okay. It really is an invaluable tool. I use it every single day to help write Extra Points. You should be subscribed to Extra Points. You could do that for free. It would be even better if you did the paid version, so you got all of the newsletters and got all of the information. Of course, you're listening to this. You should check out Collegiate Sports Connect, and then you should completely ignore the rest of your professional, ecclesiastical, civic duties the next couple of days to watch basketball. Only pausing to read our stuff or listen to our stuff, engage with our stuff. That sounds great. Do all those things. You will be happy, fulfilled over the next couple of days. We'll be here. We'll be watching all the basketball here with you, and we'll see you on the internet in a couple of days.